All right, well, I'm here with Zach Williams, the City and State New York Albany correspondent, and oh my gosh, what is happening in Albany? Is Governor Cuomo going to survive today? I start with you right there.
Well, I'm literally driving to Albany right now just to make sure we have a governor in the morning. So, the Attorney General Letitia James released her much-awaited report on alleged sexual misconduct, harassment, assaults within the governor's office, and it was quite a doozy. I think it confirms most of what we knew of the accusations from nearly a dozen women. But it also went a little bit further with an additional accuser, a state trooper, who said that the governor touched her up the small of her back, I believe. So there was a lot there. But more importantly was the reaction. There was organized labor groups like 32BJ, which, up to now have been supportive of the governor as he's insisted of his innocence and requested due process. And Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie, no less, is among those lawmakers who are now saying that he either should resign or face perhaps even immediate impeachment in the Assembly. But
right.
We never know what happens in Albany. We'll see what happens.
Well, we'll see. I don't know what your thoughts are on the impeachment probe that was called a sham. That can go nowhere. But, Zach, were you there when he did this video? I don't know if you saw the video or not. I'm sure you did. What was your facial reaction? What was your reaction when you saw this video of him coming out and talking about this?
Well, it was no surprise that the governor came out swinging. He initially took a high-minded attitude towards the probe, insisting that he would be exonerated. But as it became increasingly clear that it was going to be critical of his conduct, at least to some degree, he kind of turned on Tish James and called her politically motivated, questioned the integrity of her investigators. And it was no surprise when he came out with a video throwing shade on what she released to the public. It was damning, but he's trying to spin it, says he didn't mean, any harm to any of the women, thought he was being nice to employees like Charlotte Bennett, who, was just a young aide in his office, who said that the governor would just do the most bizarre things, including, trying to talk to her about her prior sexual assaults. Kind of odd stuff when you put it into, your everyday life. My boss doesn't do that. I hope yours doesn't either.
No, thankfully they do not. Now, it's all around bizarre. And of course, you mentioned all the lawmakers, President Biden later in the day. Did you expect him to speak out like that?
President Biden, did the smart thing politically from his standpoint. Months ago when these accusations came, he said they should be investigated. They were very serious, and that Cuomo might have to consider resigning if they were confirmed. And now that you have the Attorney General, Letitia James, issuing a report that confirms everything we heard before, he chose the easy route politically for himself. He just stood by what he said initially, and now he said, Cuomo should resign. I think he would have gotten a huge amount of political blowback if he had just kind of flip-flopped on that, right?
Right, although some in the conservative circle say as well, Democrats have each other's back, but that seemed to be disproven today. What's your sense driving up there? What are you expecting?
Well, I think the governor is going to try to buy time. He did this earlier. You got to remember President Biden and anybody else can call for him to resign, but the only way he's getting out of there is if they impeach him and they hold a trial with the state senators and the Court of Appeals justices being the jurors. And, that's going to take some time. So, if a week or two from now, if Cuomo's still there, I think his chances of holding on are really good. But, it's been a really tough day. His reaction has not been well received. And, but it's still, if he doesn't want to go, he doesn't have to go. And we've seen with the president and other elected officials that, if they just don't want to quit, nobody can really make them.
Exactly. The impeachment could, and we'll see where that goes. Tish James, is this a stake in the 2022 gubernatorial for her?
Well, the gubernatorial chatter about her have been kind of dying down, just because she'd been kind of laying low with the investigation. Don't let the Cuomo people make you think otherwise. She wasn't around just wanting and sounding off, saying things. She kind of played her hand very quietly. And if she wants to run, we'll see. I and many other people I've talked to believe that only if the governor's mortally wounded would she run. So it all comes down to the next week or so. Somebody else that's been mentioned is Tom DiNapoli. He's the state comptroller, longest-serving statewide elected official as it is. And, he might be a formidable candidate too. Voters might opt for somebody who is just kind of seen as a steady hand, a known quality, somebody that can just kind of do the job without too much distraction. But, Tish James would be a pretty formidable candidate, and issuing a report like this, just so, damning, certainly seems to wound the governor. Whether it does sit deeply enough to encourage her to run against him, I don't know if I see that happening. I think if it's an open primary, she would run, but if it's not, if Cuomo sticks in, I don't know if she's going to go for it.
And the sad part is, to me, this opinion, if he sticks in, he probably will get reelected. That's the crazy part about all this. But let me ask you, let me get your thoughts on this, because, Biden today is saying this, but he's also dropped the DOJ case against Cuomo. It's kind of like weird, is it not, to go back and forth on this?
Well, keep in mind there's an ongoing probe into the nursing home data, specifically if the Cuomo administration aides and the governor had hidden the data, and that's being overseen by the Manhattan U.S. Attorney. So, there is like a quote-unquote federal probe still ongoing. I wouldn't look into it too much. From the governor's perspective, it's never a bad thing when you have one less investigation to worry about. But, this was a civil rights investigation. It wasn't going to lead to any sort of like criminal charges, and if it would, they would have been relatively minor from what I understand. So it's good for the governor, but if we're talking about, just the facts about the nursing homes, you got to keep in mind that Tish James issued a pretty blistering report just a couple months ago. That's what keyed off all this shit show that's overcome the governor since mid-February. Her report was
no doubt about that.
Released at the end of January. Very damning. It indicated that he might have hidden the total number of nursing home residents who died in hospitals by as much as 100%. That's thousands more deaths. It was pretty bad. The irony in all this is the more scandals there are, the more complicated it seems. You're like, oh, this probe ended. Does that, mean nothing's going to happen? But, the facts are kind of out there. Again, it all comes back, being, if I can be a little humorous here, like, kind of being an asshole and hiding the data and stuff like that, and, just not being forthcoming with the New Yorkers, it's not necessarily a crime. Like, nobody's really accused the governor of, like, a real criminal act other than the woman who accuses him of, the female aide who accuses him of groping her at the executive mansion. That's certainly a crime, and a serious one. But for the most part, we're still kind of in more political, less criminal matters.
In your political coverage, this is the craziest it's been, right? I mean, you just thought last year was crazy. It's getting crazier. So are you enjoying this roller coaster, Zach, or what's your thoughts on all this?
Well, there's been so many, ever since COVID began, there's been so many opportunities to, like, come back to similar points. But in March 2020, it seemed the world was going to end sometime in, the end of June or the beginning of June 2020 when Trump was talking about sending the army into, like, democratic cities. It seemed all hell was breaking loose. Here's another example. We had the winter surge of COVID. And in terms of the political world, this is just another chapter in this crazy roller coaster that the governor has had. He was kind of middling in popularity when all this began with COVID. He had that those months of COVID briefings and kind of national stardom, and then, and like anybody, he had too much of a good thing. He wrote the book. It wasn't very good. And then all hell broke loose at the beginning of the year with the nursing home data and all these women coming forward and the whole stuff with his brother and the preferential COVID tests. And then, in the state capitol itself, just all the crazy things all the crazy wins that the lawmakers have scored, legalizing recreational marijuana, how they want to do it, the Excluded Workers Fund, so many things, but New York politics are always pretty crazy.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, so you're going to Albany right now, and I'm sure you've been on the phone all day with people, haven't you?
Well, the funny thing is I was out at this farm show outside of Syracuse following Andrew Giuliani on the campaign trail, see what that guy's all about, and then I just get all these messages from colleagues saying, the report dropped. So it's, you just never easy.
And oh man, there's so much to unpack. I want to say one quick thing though. I don't know how long you followed the governor, before city and state, but one of the first things he ever did was he cut funding for one of the games for the physically challenged, which I used to be part of. And from there, I just had a craw about him, and this whole thing seems to be validating that. This would make sense, you know what I mean? And it's like fitting almost.
Well, I think it's, something that kind of struck me is we're seeing a very powerful man who, after this and that, could lose everything, really. He doesn't even have a house. He lives in the executive mansion full time. Lose everything because of sexual harassment. And that's kind of amazing, Obviously, a lot of these elected officials want him to go for their own reasons, and they vary. But just the fact this is happening is something we really shouldn't lose sight of. This is Albany we're talking about. If you go through the annals of horrible men that have been elected representatives there who have done the most disgusting things to their staffers, there was a whole 2 days of hearings they did on that stuff. Just really disgusting, behavior. And here we have the governor. Nobody's saying he's necessarily the worst. That said, there's some very serious allegations, and he could really be held accountable for it. Imagine that.
Zach, one of my colleagues said this very interestingly. He said that, what does Elliot Spitzer think of all this? I mean, he was pretty much thrown out for doing a lot of this on the taxpayer dime. What's the difference?
Well, they're both really good examples of, if you're going to be an asshole, people love you when you're in power, and then when you're weak, they all want to shank you, Spitzer was the original bulldozer and the steamroller who thought he was the guy who, had a popular mandate to really change the state, and that he was the man. And, he got caught with the prostitutes, and that all seems kind of quaint now, but, he was accused of a lot of other serious stuff, too. So, while what brought him down seems a little bit quaint, maybe in 10 years it will seem very quaint that we were all debating whether the governor should go when he was accused of, luring a staffer to the executive mansion, allegedly, and, then stuck his shirt up the poor staffer's, stuck his hand up her shirt.
Tell me about the lengths that Tish James went, because she did hours of interviews, if I'm not mistaken.
There was a lot there, and, people always, you saw with the Mueller investigation, too, and they're like, how long is it going to happen, and when will it drop? And, this began in March, so that's March, April, May, June, July, 5 months. That seems like a pretty reasonable amount of time to talk to, dozens and dozens and dozens of people and go through, thousands of documents. And, we all got to go through the report and really see how it holds up. But, it looks pretty bad for the governor.
Why no criminal charges? Did they mention that?
Some of it's kind of arcane. The Attorney General has limited jurisdiction to launch charges against the governor. And in some ways, there's good reason for that. They're both statewide officials. Maybe one shouldn't be able to investigate the other, just like you wouldn't want to have the governor necessarily sending the state troopers on the Attorney General, maybe. So I understand. She only was able to investigate Cuomo because Cuomo gave her permission. That's how weird things are in New York State law. He was actually pressured politically when Lindsey Boylan first detailed her accusations back in I think the beginning of February. And in New York, the Attorney General cannot just investigate things of their own volition at times. Sometimes they need the governor's permission, and this was one of those instances.
I'm so glad you mentioned it, because remember, he shut down other commissions that were starting to investigate him. So this one, he actually brought on himself.
Yeah, well, a really good comparison, I think, to the Mueller investigation might be, both Trump and Cuomo tried to manage expectations. My thoughts were, if Tish James just confirmed what we had already heard and nothing more, he would just say it kind of vindicated him in his own kind of twisted logic. That didn't happen. It was much more blistering. But I think, you remember Bill Barr kind of got to release a summary of the Mueller report and do a press conference, and that really shaped the narrative because, the president was accused of some pretty serious shit, too.
Right.
Extorting a foreign country of, military aid in exchange for investigating his political opponent. And, if it had just been left as Robert Mueller wrote it, there might have been a stronger reaction in Washington to it, but Bill Barr shaped the narrative. The governor didn't get to do this. If it had been the investigators that he wanted, what was it, like Janet D. Fiore, the chief judge.
Zach, I got to ask you this. Kathy Hochul has been circling. I've seen headlines with her name. Is that poignant at this time, or is that just sort of like floating an idea that may not actually happen?
Well, with Hochul, she, kind of went out on a limb today saying these, are his conduct unbecoming of a governor. She said it was up to the assembly to decide what comes next. But, that's pretty eyebrow raising, considering it's Kathy Hochul, who's a pretty loyal soldier.
I know.
Still there?
I know that she is a very loyal person to Cuomo, but we'll have to see where the winds go. So Assembly now, is that basically where we're at, where all eyes are on Assembly?
Well, the thing that really was really surprising today was Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie said not only he hasn't called for the governor to resign explicitly, he said something like, well, if these are proven true, then maybe he should. And today he basically said, I believe what Tish James reported, and, as soon as we get whatever evidence from her, then, we'll move expeditiously with impeachment, which is, not something he said before. He was downplaying the importance of her report as recently as, last week or something. So, not good. Not good for the governor. The speaker is the one person who matters most. Not only, does he control his chamber, but, black leaders like himself are just so important to the governor right now. They're really his main block of support within the legislature, and along with labor unions, his main source of support outside Albany.
Well, downstate, you talk about black leaders, and Eric Adams is looking for any endorsement he can get, but maybe he doesn't want Cuomo's endorsement. In fact, do you think, I don't know if Cuomo's given one, but if he gives one, will Eric Adams reject this endorsement if Cuomo doesn't?
Well, I don't think Eric Adams cares one way or another, what the governor does. The governor's not known as, someone who's going to come campaign for you anyways, but, Eric Adams came out. He was another one person who said something along the lines of the governor deserves due process. He said today this was due process, and the governor's got to go. Again, not good. And for Eric Adams, the potential costs, on the one hand, nobody really cares so much what Eric Adams thinks right now because he's not mayor yet. But from Eric Adams' standpoint, you got to come out. You don't want to be one of the last people standing up for the governor. That might not be good. And on the other hand, if Cuomo survives, he's going to remember this. And I'm sure that's a potential cost that Adams, a very shrewd politician, weighed. Apparently he thinks the winds are blowing against the governor, and, to Eric Adams' credit, he's pretty good at knowing where the political winds are blowing.
Okay, so could we be facing a recall type of thing here? I mean, we should have an election for recall, okay? I don't know why we don't. That's kind of, I'd say, an arcane thing. But what happens? So if he does have to resign, Hochul takes over, but there's no special election, right, up until next year?
There would be no special election for governor. So, it's either they impeach him and remove him from office, or he either runs for re-election or he doesn't run for re-election, or he runs again next November, and we'll see, against a Republican candidate. He could win in a landslide. But, the next week or two is going to be so critical. It really comes down to how embarrassing is he to other Democrats. Because, lawmakers probably like a politically wounded Cuomo. He signed all the bills that they wanted, and he really needs them right now. And, a politically wounded Cuomo is kind of better than a Kathy Hochul, and because you don't know how she'll act. So, don't be surprised if, despite all the words, the assembly still drags its feet for some reason. But at the same time, it sure doesn't look good for the governor. There's just not a lot of good reason for encouragement except just general pessimism that the assembly would ever stand up to the guy.
Well, because they're all afraid. I mean, the assembly around Kim is a perfect example.
The governor's, a few months ago, the majority leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, held a Zoom briefing with reporters, and she was asked, will you work with the governor? And she was like, what he's going on with the scandals, we got to do our job. And then, but that she was keeping him kind of at arm's length. Boom, the next day the governor is doing a vaccine event in her district. And if she hadn't come, he would have just said, look at her playing politics. So she had to stand next to the governor, be talking about the great COVID vaccines that he's distributing to everyone. All of this to say the governor always has tricks up his sleeve. He wants to buy time. It's going to take time, at least a couple of weeks for the assembly to move. It's not like they can just go tomorrow and impeach the guy, and then the Senate's just going to do a trial, the next day. These things do take time. Could it happen in all this month? I mean, maybe, maybe not. But we'll see in the next week or two. I think it's just going to be so pivotal.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of pivotal, is having whether it's Governor Cuomo or Lieutenant Governor Hochul, is that pivotal for the mayoral election to just know that, one way or the other?
Sliwa is never going to be mayor of New York City. Prove me wrong. He's got, no money. The party doesn't really support him. He's got all his crazy cats. Maybe that's a lost opportunity, but, it's too bad for the Republicans that Cuomo's not running for re-election this year, because then the Democrats would be left scrambling. There would probably be a really nasty primary. But that's not going to happen. There's a whole year until the gubernatorial election. Cuomo's either going to have recovered by then, or he's going to be long gone. I don't think we're going to be talking about impeachment in October 2022.
Zach, you have to have some personality to be a politician. It's amazing how unfazed he is about all this.
Well, he knows the chessboard better than anybody. if it has to come down to a trial in the what's called the Court of Impeachments with, of course, the state senators and the justices, the Court of Appeals acting as the jurors, we don't know if there's 2/3 votes there. There's a lot of ways to make lawmakers consider whether it is good or bad. And as they say, if you're gonna kill the king, if you're gonna come after the king, you better kill him, because if you wound him, it's not gonna be good. We've seen that before in recent years. The state senator Kathy Young tried to take out Minority Leader John Flanagan in her own little coup of sorts, and she lost, and bam, a couple months later she's out of the legislature all of a sudden. But the governor, he's gonna. Yeah, I think the odds are he's still gonna hang on. Right now, it's just a bunch of politicians speaking. So in terms of impeachment and removing it from office, I'll believe it when I see it. When they schedule it, then I'll start thinking they're actually going to do it.
And we'll have to get you back when that whole thing starts. But, Zach, where can we find your writing on all this? Where can we find you on Twitter?
Well, I can be found on Twitter at Zach, ZAC Court. And so much going on. Just trying to keep up. It's so hard.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking some time on your busy evening to talk to us about this, and let's stay tuned and see what happens.
I'm sure there'll be lots to talk about next time. Thank you so much for hearing my thoughts.
You got it. Zach Williams of the City and State, New York, Albany correspondent. Me. I'm Alex Garrett. Stay tuned for more as this podcast starts heating up. There's the newsy stuff, right? We'll talk to you soon, everybody.